Have you ever spent years building something only to watch someone who doesn't understand it get handed the keys? My name is Lucas Navarro. I'm 45 years old, and for nearly 2 decades, I was the lead cybersecurity architect at Virion Capital, a financial tech firm based in Miami. I designed every security layer, every compliance protocol, every firewall that protected over $1.2 billion in daily international transactions. I gave this company 18 years of my life without a single breach, a single fine, a single minute of system downtime. Then one morning, I was called into a boardroom. Across from me sat Aubrey, the CEO's 26-year-old niece, flashing a polished smile while scrolling through her phone. "She's going to bring a fresh, modern perspective," the CEO said, adjusting his cufflinks. "She has ideas about decentralization and public-facing transparency. Ideas, buzzwords." I stayed silent. I nodded politely. But something inside me, something I didn't yet have words for, shifted. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't being asked to guide her. I was being replaced. And this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when the system quietly, elegantly decides to respond. If you've ever been underestimated, stay with me. And if this story resonates, like, comment, or subscribe, because some legacies refuse to be erased quietly. I joined Virion Capital when it was just a handful of desks in a rented co-working space off Biscayne Boulevard. No fancy branding, no million-dollar clients, just a few of us working late nights, chasing bugs, drinking too much coffee, and trying to build something that mattered. I still remember the first time I patched a live vulnerability at 2:17 a.m., alone in the office, while the rest of the city slept. That patch eventually became the foundation for our core protection protocol. It's strange how the smallest moments shape the biggest systems. Back then, our CEO, Martin Rivas, was all hustle. No ego, no luxury suits. He'd walk around in sneakers and ask every intern their name. When my mother passed away unexpectedly in 2010, Martin sent flowers to the funeral and told me to take as much time as I needed with pay. "The system can wait," he said. "People matter more." And I believed him. Over the years, I wrote every line of our back-end infrastructure, from penetration firewalls and encrypted routing layers to identity protection systems for high-net-worth clients across 6 countries. By 2022, our infrastructure was moving over $1 billion a day. Not $1 misplaced, not one client breached. But success changes people. And it changed Martin. After the company was acquired by a global investment group, Martin stopped walking around the office. New titles started appearing: Innovation Evangelist, Experience Architect. We stopped doing team stand-ups and started getting internal newsletters signed with corporate slogans. Martin still smiled, but it was different now, measured distant, like someone playing a role they didn't write. That's when Aubrey started showing up. At first, it was just an internship to learn the business side of tech. She'd sit in on our weekly syncs, nodding while watching videos on her phone with the volume off. She started asking questions like, "Can we just move everything to the blockchain?" or "What's the point of separate staging environments?" The first time she referred to our endpoint vulnerability scanner as just antivirus, I nearly choked on my coffee. But I kept it professional. I always had. I'd learned long ago that the most dangerous threats don't announce themselves loudly. They creep in slowly, unnoticed. One day, I walked into a leadership meeting and noticed a new seat filled Todd Miller, Director of Innovation Strategy. Fresh haircut, thin resume, and a gold chain barely hidden under a $300 polo. Aubrey introduced him. "He's advising me on transformation planning," she said. "He's got a TikTok following for startup hacks." He looked at me and smiled like he already owned the place. I tried to ignore the red flags. I told myself maybe I was being paranoid. But the signs kept stacking. I wasn't invited to 3 security planning meetings in a row. Aubrey began suggesting modernization initiatives that included gutting entire layers of security we'd spent a decade building. One afternoon, she brought up the idea of replacing our encrypted authentication model with a facial recognition plugin she saw on a tech blog. I tried explaining how that would open the door to compliance violations and international data sharing conflicts. She waved her hand and said, "Honestly, I just feel like you're stuck in the past." Todd nodded along. We need to move faster. Then came the meeting where she showed a pitch deck titled Virion Redesigning Trust. Slide one out with the old, in with the bold. And that's when I understood. This wasn't about moving forward. It was about leaving people like me behind. Quietly, cleanly. What they didn't know was this: every system I built, everyone had a memory. And systems don't forget who kept them alive through every storm. The real shift began when I was asked twice in 1 week to resubmit documentation I had already meticulously updated just 3 months prior. At first, I assumed it was a clerical error. But then a third request came, and this time flagged as urgent by Todd, and I started to pay closer attention. I checked the admin logs that night, just a habit I'd built over the years. There it was, several login attempts from a device I didn't recognize accessing internal documentation between 1:00 and 3:00 a.m. on consecutive weekends. The IP matched an internal machine, but the credential trail was oddly generic admin shadow 2. I hadn't created it, and it wasn't in our registry. I pulled up the device fingerprint. It was a laptop registered under Todd's name. Something was off. A few days later, I was stopped in the hallway by someone from compliance asking about a report I hadn't filed. I asked which report. He named a monthly encryption audit I'd never been responsible for. "Todd said you were transitioning some of your tasks," he said casually. Didn't you know I didn't respond? But inside, something started unraveling. I wasn't being asked to share knowledge. I was being bled dry, one responsibility at a time. Aubrey, meanwhile, had taken to hosting what she called culture-building sessions every Friday. It was a strange blend of startup jargon and influencer branding. One Friday, she asked our entire team to create vision boards about what cybersecurity meant to us emotionally. I declined the invitation. The following Monday, my access to our server health dashboard had been revoked. "Sorry," Lucas, Todd said in a Slack message, "just rerouting oversight responsibilities so Aubrey can get more hands-on." Right. Aubrey's idea of hands-on was posting LinkedIn photos from our server room standing next to blinking equipment like it was a fashion shoot backdrop. In one caption, she wrote, "Leading innovation from the inside. Proud to be reimagining security for a new generation." She had 47,000 likes in 2 days. I couldn't sleep that night. It wasn't just the access changes or the sudden audits, it was the way the air felt heavier. Every morning I walked into the building, the way conversations stopped when I entered the room. I'd become a ghost in a company I helped bring to life. Then came the moment that made everything crystal clear. One Friday evening, while cleaning up the sandbox environment, I discovered a 0-day vulnerability in our session handling middleware, a tiny logic flaw that could have allowed session hijacking under the right conditions. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was urgent. I patched it immediately, isolated the affected layer, and logged the fix in our system. Monday morning, I was called into Martin's office. He looked tired. Aubrey was seated next to him, scrolling her phone as usual. Todd stood by the window, arms crossed. Lucas Martin began, "We appreciate your initiative, but Aubrey raised a concern about last week's system change. Something about unauthorized action." "It was a critical patch," I said. "I documented everything and notified DevSecOps." Aubrey finally looked up. "But don't you think making changes without team consensus sets a dangerous precedent?" "A dangerous precedent?" I repeated, stunned. It was a live vulnerability. Waiting would have put client data at risk. Martin exhaled slowly. "We just want to align on a protocol that ensures no one feels left out of the loop." For the first time in my career, I felt like an outsider. Not because I didn't know what I was doing, but because the people around me didn't care how it was done. They weren't protecting the system. They were protecting the illusion of control. That night, I stayed in the office late. I reviewed every layer of our infrastructure, every flag, every log. I sat in silence and watched the system breathe as if it knew what was coming. And then I opened something I hadn't touched in years, the original blueprint of fail-safe Zeta. They wanted to phase me out quietly, but they were about to find out that some things don't go quietly at all. It was nearly midnight when I opened the terminal window and accessed a backdoor log system I designed during our first year, meant to trace irregular admin behavior during live incidents. It was dusty code, ancient by today's standards, but reliable. Within seconds, I was inside. What I found confirmed what I had already begun to suspect, but on a scale I hadn't anticipated. A series of file transfers had taken place over the last 6 weeks. Not to external IPs, no, they were too smart for that, but to a local partition hidden inside the company's old legal archive drive. Buried beneath folders labeled Q11 tax prep and retainer contracts, 2016 sat a file titled OPCC Plan Final V3 PPPX. I opened it. My breath caught in my throat. Phase 1. Institutional Knowledge Transfer. Reassign responsibility of critical systems. Shadow current architect. Collect and document undocumented protocols. Minimize exposure during transition. Phase 2. Leadership transition and narrative management. Introduce digital transformation initiative. Publicly announce new leadership. Use branding channels to shift perception. Phase 3. Infrastructure modernization. Decommission legacy. Security systems. Engage outside consultancy. ZetaWorks for rebuild. Remove access credentials from non-essential personnel. Phase 4, offboarding. Transition legacy personnel to strategic advisory role. Offer standard severance package. Publicly thank for service. And at the bottom, under projected savings, Lucas Navarro. Salary elimination, $184,000 year. Consulting replacement, Aubrey Rivas, $85,000 year. Plus branding exposure. Branding exposure. They weren't replacing me with someone better. They were replacing me with someone cheaper and more photogenic. A girl who posted inspirational quotes under server room selfies was now the face of a system she didn't understand. Because she cost less. Because she could smile on camera. Because I didn't look good on LinkedIn. The deeper I dug, the worse it became. I found an email chain between Todd and a consulting firm called ZetaWorks. Subject legacy phase-out strategy. Attached diagrams of the entire system architecture I had built. Firewalls, access controls, encryption layers, maps that only I could have drawn, except they weren't mine. They were recreated. Poorly. With dangerous oversights. Inaccuracies that could compromise compliance or even trigger regulatory penalties. And then the final insult, a slide from a private investor pitch deck dated 3 weeks prior. Slide 12, eliminating single points of failure. My name was listed underneath. I wasn't just being removed, I was being labeled as a liability. A single point of failure. No mention of the 18 years of service. No note on the 0% breach rate. No credit for writing the very frameworks they were now stripping apart. I was a threat, not to the system, but to their narrative. I printed the entire deck, stapled it, and placed it in my desk drawer. Then I opened another terminal window and accessed a subsystem I had written during a 2014 contract with a government defense client. It was a system designed to test worst-case scenarios, hostile takeovers, state-sponsored attacks, and yes, internal breaches. I had called it Failsafe Zeta. Back then, we were young and cautious, paranoid even. But that paranoia had shaped me. It had made me design security with not just external enemies in mind, but internal arrogance too. Failsafe Zeta was elegant. It didn't destroy data. It encrypted it in layers using a rotating cipher that reset every 17 minutes. Without the proper biometric token mine, the system could not be decrypted. Even I couldn't access it without my scan. And the trigger. An unauthorized attempt to overwrite critical architecture modules, exactly what I'd seen Todd and Aubrey trying to map out. I hadn't designed it out of spite. I designed it out of responsibility, because I knew that someday someone might take over our system without understanding what they were touching. And when that day came, the system would not crash. It would protect itself. They thought I was just some aging technician clinging to a fading role. But they had no idea what I had built into the bones of Virion. And now that I'd seen their plan, I wouldn't lift a finger. I would let the system decide who deserved to stay. When you've built something from scratch, every line of code, every access point, every silent defense, you begin to understand its language. Not just how it operates, but how it reacts. You learn to read its silences, its rhythms, its subtle pulses, like a living organism. And like anything alive, it knows when it's being threatened. Failsafe Zeta wasn't some backdoor trapdoor cobbled together in a moment of bitterness. It was part of the system's DNA. A self-regulating response to unauthorized interference installed during those years when Virion was handling confidential work for defense contractors. It had passed every audit because it had never activated. It had simply been waiting. I'd embedded the protocol at the deepest layer of the system's core framework, buried beneath the biometric gatekeeping modules that authenticated identity across all server interactions. To activate any administrative override at that level, the system required a real-time biometric signature mine, voice fingerprint retinal confirmation, not one, all three. If it detected an attempt without full authorization, it wouldn't send an alert. It wouldn't freeze up. It would initiate what I called vault silence. Vault silence wasn't destruction. It was encryption so deep, so layered, that even the best quantum-resistant systems couldn't break it without the key. No files lost, just rendered invisible, locked behind thousands of continuously shifting cipher walls. From a technical perspective, it was perfect. From a legal standpoint, it was watertight, no deletion, no malicious intent, just protection. After all, I'd programmed it to activate only when the core architecture itself was being altered without clearance. And now, with Todd and Aubrey pushing ahead, talking about streamlining the backend and simplifying architecture, I knew they were approaching the threshold. The beauty of Failsafe Zeta was its detachment. It didn't care about ego or titles. It didn't care about feelings. It didn't recognize the CEO's last name or whether someone had gone viral for posting about startup culture. It saw threats in code, in actions, in fingerprints, or the lack thereof. They were preparing their takeover through branding campaigns and investor meetings. I was preparing through silence. That weekend, I ran a diagnostic scan on the trigger layer just to make sure everything still worked. It did. The system's response time was 1.4 seconds. That's how long it would take for everything: the firewall schema, the compliance logs, the transaction routing tables, the encrypted asset archives to vanish from human reach. Not destroyed, just unreachable. They'd created a plan to replace me without understanding the gravity of what I had built. And that was the problem with people like Aubrey and Todd. They thought technology was just a tool, something pretty to showcase. A pitch deck slide, a buzzword generator for investors. They didn't see the weight of what held it together, but the system did. Monday morning would begin the official knowledge transfer phase. 2 weeks, they said, to teach Aubrey how to manage something that had taken me 18 years to architect. They thought it was a formality, a symbolic gesture. But that's the thing about security protocols built by engineers, not marketers. They don't care what your intentions are. They only care what your fingerprint says. And hers said, unauthorized. The countdown had begun. Monday arrived like a bad joke, wrapped in glossy optimism and casual disrespect. The calendar invitation had read, "Onboarding Session Knowledge Flow with Lucas Navarro, Knowledge Flow," as if what I knew could be poured into a cup and handed over with a smile. I arrived 15 minutes early, like always. Conference room 4C, glass walls, fake succulents, and a whiteboard that no one had used since pre-pandemic days. I'd spent the weekend preparing, not because I believed in the process, but because I wanted a clean exit. No excuses, no accusations of sabotage. I had printed system maps, hand-drawn documentation, color-coded architecture layers. Everything was clear, precise, foolproof. Aubrey walked in 22 minutes late, iced coffee, in hand designer headphones still around her neck. She didn't apologize. She looked around like she was trying to decide where to take the best selfie. "So, this is it?" she asked, pulling a brand new MacBook out of a box and peeling the plastic off the screen. "This is where it starts," I replied. Calm. Professional. Already gone inside. I began with the basics, how our data pipeline handled 1.2 billion in transactions, daily moving through encrypted channels with layered compliance checks across 6 regulatory frameworks. Aubrey blinked, typed half a sentence, and asked, "Wait, what's the difference between front end and back end again?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I didn't know how to answer that without insulting her. "It depends on who's asking," I said. She smiled like I'd just told her a clever riddle. By the end of hour 1, she had checked her phone 6 times and said, "This is overwhelming," at least 3. She asked if we could just move everything to the cloud and if we had considered simplifying the backend to make it more user-friendly for management. I explained that our architecture was bound by federal compliance laws, which don't bend for aesthetics. "That's the kind of rigidity we're trying to move away from," she said brightly, jotting something down. Todd popped in midway through the session with 2 energy drinks and a camera crew. Just a few quick shots for our internal comms rebrand. He asked me to pose next to Aubrey while she clicked through the dashboard I'd built. In the photo, I'm half smiling. She's pointing at the screen like she just discovered gravity. Later that day, I received a feedback form from HR asking how I felt about the empowerment of emerging leadership during transitional knowledge initiatives. I didn't respond, but things escalated quickly. The next morning, I received a message from Martin. Lucas quick chat. I walked into his office and found Aubrey already seated, hands folded, expression rehearsed. "Look," Martin began. "I know you've been trying to provide context, but Aubrey feels you're making things overly complicated. She says you've been using terminology to gatekeep the system." Gatekeep, I was teaching her the minimum required to not destroy a billion-dollar system. "She's feeling excluded," Martin continued. "Like maybe you're not setting her up to succeed. She's trying to bypass federal infrastructure without understanding what DNS means," I said evenly. "That's not exclusion. That's physics." Aubrey didn't meet my eyes. She just whispered, "He does this all the time." Martin sighed. "Let's try a new approach. Focus less on the weeds and more on high-level management. The vision stuff." "The vision runs on encrypted databases and compliance logs," I said. "There is no high level if the foundation breaks." Todd walked by the glass window and gave me a thumbs up. That was the moment I knew they weren't asking for my knowledge. They were asking for my silence. But the system, it never forgets. It never flatters. It never performs for the camera. And it never tolerates fraud. It happened on a Thursday afternoon quietly, without fanfare, like most collapses do. By that point, the knowledge transfer had devolved into branding sessions. Aubrey had stopped asking technical questions altogether. Instead, she spent her time designing internal newsletters with slogans like "Security is a mindset" and filming short TikToks about breaking legacy barriers. Todd applauded her every move. Martin stopped checking in. They thought the system was theirs now. What they didn't realize was it had been listening the entire time. At 3:57 p.m., I received a final Slack message from Martin. "We appreciate your service, Lucas. Today marks the start of a new chapter." He added a handshake emoji. I closed my laptop, stood up, and calmly walked out of the office I had occupied for 18 years. No goodbyes, no ceremony, just gravity. At 4:02 p.m., Aubrey attempted to implement her first visionary improvement. She tried to override the core system access protocols, replacing two-factor biometric authentication with a new single sign-on plugin she had found online. The system didn't crash, it didn't freeze, it didn't raise an alarm, it simply responded. Failsafe Zeta activated. In 1.4 seconds, over 950 terabytes of financial architecture were sealed, vaulted behind military-grade encryption layers. Access logs, compliance reports, real-time transaction ledgers, even the redundant backups synced across 3 regions, gone, not deleted. Not stolen, just silent. At 4:03 p.m., the first internal alert triggered "Unable to authenticate master session." By 4:04, the dashboard went blank. Clients began calling at 4:07, unable to process international transfers, unable to verify trading batches, unable to access contracts dating back a decade. At 4:11, I was sitting in my car parked outside a bookstore downtown, sipping cold coffee, when my phone buzzed. Todd. "Lucas, thank God, we need you." "Something's wrong with the system." What kind of wrong, I asked, though I already knew. "We can't access anything. It's like everything disappeared." Did you check the master error logs?" "We can't. They're missing. So are the backups. So is everything. It's like the entire network just folded." "That's strange," I said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Aubrey was trying to implement some changes, something with access protocols." I took another sip. Yes, her streamlining initiative." "We need you to come back in." He said, the panic unmistakable now. "Clients are furious. Regulators are already asking questions. We need you to undo whatever happened. I don't work there anymore, remember. But you built these systems. You're the only one who understands them." I documented everything I replied. Isn't that what the knowledge transfer was for? There was silence on the other end. Then another call came in, Martin this time. "Lucas, please. We're in trouble." "Major trouble. I warned you," I said. "You wanted the future Martin. Now you have it. We'll pay you, whatever it takes. Just restore the system." "You misunderstood something very basic," I said. "It's not about payment. It's about trust." And with that, I hung up. By 6:00 p.m., headlines had started appearing: "Catastrophic system failure at Virion, capital billions frozen as internal access collapse hits fintech giant." Within 24 hours, our largest clients had pulled their contracts. Regulatory agencies launched emergency reviews. The Department of Financial Protection opened a formal investigation. Internally, they tried to shift the blame, calling it a legacy system flaw. But engineers from external firms were quick to point out no known system does that on accident. No, this was intentional, but not vengeful. Just intelligent, just designed right. The system didn't belong to me anymore, but it remembered who built it. And when the wrong hands tried to rewrite its purpose, it didn't ask questions. It simply shut the door. By Friday morning, the walls were crumbling. Virion's entire transaction infrastructure remained locked, untouchable, unreadable, and utterly silent. The internal team had attempted every possible workaround: code rollbacks, emergency credential resets, even third-party forensics. None of it mattered. Without biometric clearance, the system wasn't going to listen. And I was no longer on the payroll. The headlines got uglier by the hour. $1.2 billion frozen Virion faces, fintech meltdown, rookie exec linked to catastrophic breach, security protocols, trigger collapse. After internal tampering, Aubrey deactivated all her social media accounts by noon. Todd was placed on immediate administrative leave. Martin, according to the press release, had voluntarily stepped back to support the investigation. Behind the curtain, the firm was hemorrhaging. By Monday, over 70% of Virion's clients had begun legal action or moved their assets to competitors. Regulators demanded a full audit of the company's internal transitions, particularly the decision to replace a certified architect with someone whose most relevant credential was a trending hashtag. The company's valuation dropped 82% by the end of the week. Stockholders panicked. Employees packed their things. The office that once buzzed with overconfidence now echoed with silence and cardboard boxes. And I spent that same Monday in the lounge of an executive terminal at Miami International Airport, sipping tea and reviewing my new employment contract, 5 years, Geneva-based, triple my former salary, full relocation covered. The offer had arrived less than 48 hours after the first news alert. Apparently, in the cybersecurity world, reputation travels fast, especially when your system performs exactly as designed. Before boarding, I walked past the Virion Tower one last time. The lights on the top floors were dark. The food truck outside, where I used to get my late-night empanadas during 2 a.m. patch deployments, was gone. They had gutted their foundation in the name of progress. But what they forgot is this progress without understanding is just destruction dressed in optimism. They silenced the one person who could have warned them, and the system. It didn't scream. It didn't cry. It simply closed the gates, not out of spite, but because it was taught to protect itself when no one else would. What happened at Virion isn't just a cautionary tale about technology, it's a lesson in arrogance. In today's corporate landscape, there's a growing trend of replacing deep expertise with surface-level innovation. Legacy professionals are dismissed in favor of fresh energy, and systems built on years of sweat and precision are handed to people chasing engagement metrics instead of understanding. But real systems, financial, digital, or human, don't run on slogans. They run on integrity, accountability, and the kind of quiet mastery that takes years to earn. Lucas wasn't simply an employee. He was the nervous system of the company. When they cut him out, they didn't just lose a man. They severed the connection to everything that made Virion secure. And here's the deeper truth. Sometimes justice doesn't come with noise or vengeance. Sometimes it arrives in silence with precision, like a system doing exactly what it was built to do. If you've ever been underestimated, quietly replaced, or treated like a relic in the world you helped build, you know exactly how this story feels. If this story moved something in, you share it. Like it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we tell the stories that others try to erase.